I think you put this in front of a group of college students today, there would be like some real problems
maybe.
about, okay, I think that the biggest
centering German character.
Exactly. I think the biggest problem would be getting over this hang up of we're seeing things from this German's perspective, and then we're being made to sympathize with him.
Right.
And then care about his conversion and like forgive him, Like this is a level of humanity that I don't think we're capable of, at least publicly. This is Criteria.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Criteria. I'm Thomas Miras. I'm here with my co-host James Majewski. Hello, James.
Hello, Thomas. Hello, everyone.
We're just keeping on going in our final stretch of the Vatican film list.
We are, and notably today, without any guest.
No guest.
It's been a while since we've done that.
Yeah, I guess so.
Do you recall when the last time was?
No. Do you know?
No, I don't. But it feels good.
Great
it feels very freeing.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Do you not feel like kind of liberated somehow?
Yeah, in a way.
On the other hand,
pressure.
On the other hand, there is a little more pressure because we don't have someone else's opinion to lean on.
Right. No, that's very true.
But I'm not wearing any headphones right now.
Right.
That's pretty crazy.
Although true pros would wear headphones even when recording by themselves to monitor themselves.
Right. We're not even monitoring the video on this one.
No.
We're monitoring nothing.
Yeah.
So it'll just be, a nice surprise.
Unlike
at the end of this.
the Nazis. We're monitoring nothing. Never mind. Anyway. So 3 films from the end. 3 films from the end of the Vatican film list. Today's film is Schindler's List, directed by Steven Spielberg, released in 1993, included on the Vatican film list under the category of values. First of all, it's a masterpiece, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just saying that is a value judgment. Secondly, it's like the fastest 3 hours and 15 minutes of film that I've ever seen.
True.
In terms of like how easy it is to watch. It does raise the question of should a movie about the Holocaust be like go by that quickly? I'm not saying it's not like horrifying in parts. Of course it is, but like it's still like definitely like a bearable movie to watch.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it should be totally unbearable because then what would be the point of making it? But like I just wonder. I'm not saying it's a problem, but I'm just like asking.
No, I get it.
Like, should a movie about the Holocaust be like a little bit more unbearable?
This is a good question, and it's a good way to start off the episode because I will say that this is one of the reasons why I was maybe more open to putting this film off was because it just seemed like, oh, gee, okay, that one's going to be heavy. That one's going to be hard to talk about, and maybe it's good to put this at the beginning of the episode too, because maybe people are thinking the same going into a discussion of this film. Like, oh, here we go.
Right.
But, actually, the film is very watchable, very, dare I say, entertaining.
Yes. This is, by the way, both of our first times having seen this film. I'm sure a lot of the listeners have already seen it.
Yeah. Well, it came out when I was 3 years old.
Right.
Which... And so I've grown up with it sort of as this cultural touchstone.
Mm-hmm.
But I was never old enough to see it when it was like sort of really part of the cultural landscape,
Right.
Easy reference.
Yeah.
And then I guess by the time I was old enough to see it, the world had moved on. I did see Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah.
Another Spielberg World War II film.
He made that?
I think so.
Okay.
But and there's certainly a lot of similarities between the two. But
I haven't seen any of his. I mean, this is the like. So this and crazily, this and Jurassic Park came out the same year. I think he was editing Jurassic Park like at night when he was shooting this movie, and I think I have not seen a single Spielberg movie after like that year. So I haven't seen AI, haven't seen Lincoln, whatever else.
Yeah, I saw Lincoln. I saw Bridge of Spies.
I haven't seen Minority Report. I think Bridge of Spies was Spielberg.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to eventually, I think, probably talk about Spielberg on the podcast at some point.
Right.
And maybe this should have been that.
This does feel like a movie only he could have made.
Yes. But I didn't go into this discussion thinking that I was going to talk much about Spielberg as a director.
Sure.
So maybe we'll just put put that on the docket for what happens after the Vatican Film List.
Sure. Yeah. But I mean, I will say that like it is interesting because like it has his skill set. It's like an auteur film. It's slightly art housey while like also being very accessible and like very legible and transparent while not being like stylistically cliche,
Right.
So
and so that's what I'll say about its watchability, if that's a word, and its entertainment value, is that I think that this is probably a plus. I think that the topic of the Holocaust is really so difficult to actually enter into,
right,
that you kind of need to have some sort of guidance into it. And I think that Spielberg accomplishes that by just making a really great film that is actually quite merciful at times with its audience in terms of, the kinds of emotional heartstrings it's going to pull.
And it's from the perspective of a German guy.
Yeah.
And it's got a sort of a happy ending, which is like kind of strange. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying we should just have like a hopeless film about the Holocaust, right?
Yeah.
But let me set up some antagonism that we can maybe use to discuss different ways you could look at this film.
Sure.
So have you heard of the documentary Shoah?
No, I don't think so.
So Shoah was this 1985 9-hour long documentary of the Holocaust. It was kind of like a big, much discussed, work at the time. And lots of interviews with survivors and even like Nazis and stuff, So I haven't seen it. I honestly think it would be probably a good thing to do on the podcast eventually. I think it would be interesting, but, Claude Lanzmann, this French Jew who made this documentary, he hated Schindler's List, and he thought it was like just an utter violation. He said, "Fiction is a transgression. I am deeply convinced that there is a ban on depiction of the Holocaust in fiction." And he criticized Spielberg for viewing it through the eyes of a German. He said, "It is the world in reverse." And then he also said, "I sincerely thought there was a time before Shoah and a time after Shoah, and after Shoah, certain things could no longer be done. Spielberg did them anyway."
Wow.
Now, I don't know if he was, I think he, when he said that, he was talking about his film Shoah, not like the event of the Shoah, which is like a Jewish name that some people use for the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So I don't agree with like the world seen in reverse thing, because that just seems a little bit like racially wrong. But I think, I don't know, it's a little too vague of a criticism to like dig into totally. But I think on a general level, it like raises this question of like, is he right that like there's some problem with like depicting the Holocaust in a way that is not just like utterly devastating? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm desensitized. I'm not saying this is a correct criticism of the movie. I think it raises some worthwhile questions.
Sure.
So maybe I'm desensitized. Other people may have responded to the movie differently than I am. Probably like a teenager who didn't know much about the Holocaust would be like just like totally like freaked out, by the movie. I did find it horrifying in many ways. You can't not. But like, yeah, it is. What is it about the movie that makes it like go down so easy?
Yeah. Well, maybe this is a good point to just tell our viewers who maybe haven't seen this film what the movie's about. So yes, it's about the Holocaust, but it's specifically about this German businessman, industrialist, Oskar Schindler. He goes to Poland right after the invasion and basically He's basically a war profiteer. He basically leverages the situation to get cheap Jewish labor to set up a factory that's going to produce pots and pans to fuel the German war effort, and make a lot of money. And that's his main concern. Mm-hmm. He's introduced as very much a con man. He's very confident. Not that he's duplicitous or deceitful necessarily, but he's
about image.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then he works with a Jewish accountant played by Ben Kingsley. Oskar Schindler is played by Liam Neeson.
Right.
And this accountant, he kind of sees an opportunity here to help the Jewish people. And so he starts using his position working for Oskar Schindler to sort of provide cover to certain elderly Jews or Jews who would otherwise be, sent off to the work camps, who maybe are not useful, not essential workers. Maybe they're, handicapped, or perhaps they're professors of literature or history. He gets them into the factory, and now they have this sort of essential worker status.
Right.
And so there ends up being this sort of humanitarian kind of byproduct of Oskar Schindler's tenacity, and greed, really. And then at a certain point in the film, Schindler has a kind of conversion, a kind of change of heart.
Yeah. Well, I don't even know if I would point it to any one point. It's a very gradual. I think that's
we can talk about that.
One of the things that's very well done in the movie is the gradualness of Schindler's moral development.
Yeah.
And also the gradualness of the Holocaust itself.
Totally.
Where you're just starting out, they're making all the Jews from the countryside come into Krakow and register.
Yeah.
Then they're putting them all into the ghetto. Then the ghetto is liquidated.
Yeah.
And they're sending people to the work camp. And then they're starting to kill off, they're already starting to kill off elderly or sick people. Yeah. And then it just keeps ramping up until they're starting to send people to Auschwitz.
Right. So at a certain point, Schindler sort of pivots to, instead of just profiting off of these Jewish laborers,
right,
he begins to actively help them.
Right. So it's I would say the transition is that at first he's sort of begrudgingly doing it. In other words, he's at first kind of annoyed with Itzhak Stern, who is his business manager, and because he's it's not safe for us to get a reputation as being a haven,
right,
for Jewish people. It's supposed to be a profit operation, and they're making enamelware for the German army, and then over time he's already helping. And over time, he sort of switches to fully intentionally making that his main goal.
Yeah.
Yeah. That I'd say that's the transition.
Yeah. So then the film does end up with a kind of a happy ending, because amazingly, Oskar Schindler does succeed in rescuing. It's 1,200 people.
I think it's 1,100.
1,100. Yeah. So yeah, it really is quite an amazing and remarkable story. But certainly peppered throughout.
Yeah, and it's a true story. I don't know if we actually said that.
Sure.
Yes, it's a totally true story.
Right.
So
this description of the film as fiction, I mean, it is a fictionalized account in a certain sense, because it's obviously been dramatized. But that's a little misleading.
Yeah.
Because it isn't strictly fiction.
Right.
This is the story of a pretty remarkable man doing something pretty remarkable. And
also it's interesting because Spielberg does take kind of it's clearly it's a fictional film in its approach, but he also tries to make it a little bit like a documentary. He makes it in black and white for the most part. But then at the end, he also brings forth, it cuts to present day, 1993, and you're actually seeing the elderly, a number of the Schindler Juden, the Jews that Schindler saved, who have now grown elderly and had kids and grandkids, or some of them were children, at the time, and you actually see them processing and paying their respects to Schindler's tomb.
Yeah.
So he brings in that aspect of reality to
Right.
it as well.
Which is something that
Yeah.
was also done in Saving Private Ryan. Also itself a very entertaining and legible film.
Right.
But also, I think that film begins with some interviews with soldiers who were there for the beach landing on D-Day.
So interesting.
And so I think that this is probably part of the project is somehow documenting that this historical event and getting some of these people and putting them on camera in a way that isn't just strictly a documentary. Not that documentary form is like something that's like less than or something, but it's a different form. You know?
And by the way, like just to like in the film's defense, it was one of the Schindler Juden, Poldek Pfefferberg, who like set the whole thing in motion. There's an Australian novel that this film is based on called Schindler's Ark, and it was Poldek Pfefferberg, the Holocaust survivor, who convinced the author of that book to write his novel, and then it was him who bugged like Spielberg for years and years to make a movie about it. And so Spielberg actually like he put it off because he didn't feel like he was ready. I think he waited like 10 years to make it, and he actually tried to get Polanski to make it. He was then he later Polanski wouldn't do it, and then Polanski was actually like he was in the Warsaw Ghetto, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe actually in the Krakow Ghetto.
Krakow, and he did do The Pianist, which is another Holocaust film.
Yeah. So, but then he ended up giving it to Scorsese, and he like sort of traded movies with him. Scorsese was going to make Cape Fear, and then Spielberg was going to make it instead. But anyway, Spielberg eventually ended up, he ended up making the movie.
Yeah.
So it was all at the behest of one of the people who was there. You know what I mean? So like it feels like that legitimizes the project. It wasn't even just that he like got his approval. It's like he was the guy who wanted it to happen, you know?
Yeah. And as much as the film is about Schindler, it's also very much about the Holocaust.
Right.
So like you've already mentioned, it does sort of show us this progression, and there is sort of commentary that's sort of put in there, kind of happenstantial commentary where you'll hear German soldiers discussing like the latest initiative or like what's coming down the pipeline or whatever.
You just made up a great new word.
Happenstantial.
Yeah.
But it's sort of the idea being that there is clearly a kind of documentary thrust.
Yeah.
Where things that are being said are sort of giving us some exposition about how this policy is developing of extermination, and then even cinematically, there's kind of an emphasis on certain things like, oh well, like we're seeing what was done with the luggage that was left behind at the station, and how all the jewelry was taken and sorted out, and how like all these family photos and pictures are dumped. There's something of a sense of being in the Holocaust Museum, for instance, when you're watching some of these scenes.
Totally.
So it's not that this film is completely insensitive to this.
No.
Not at all. But it does kind of lean into the fact that this is a movie, and even a Hollywood movie.
Right.
It begins with Schindler going to a nightclub and basically like kind of conning his way into being the life of the party and like the man to know, and all these SS officers are trying to get their picture with him, and the ladies are falling all over him.
It's fascinating. Like it's fascinating, the way that he throughout the entire movie is just like buddying up with like the head of this work, this labor camp, Aman Gut, like played by Ray Fiennes, and the way that he knows this guy is a psychopath, and he's just like grinning and going to throwing parties and like, you know what I mean?
But even before we get there, just seeing him work his thing, it's very evocative of, say, a film like, and I never actually saw this, but that movie Catch Me If You Can, or like any number of movies where I think that we actually there's like a kind of satisfaction just in seeing this kind of a character.
Right.
The smooth talker, who's
Yeah.
just going to kind of win everybody over.
Yeah.
So the entertainment value is very high already.
Right.
And there's a certain kind of stylization too
Yes.
in the way that things are presented, not just the fact that the film is black and white, but there's the cigarette smoke, and then there's the hard shadows on Liam Neeson's face and his eyes being illuminated, or there's sort of interesting profiles or framing where he's tipping off the maitre d' and like,
and there's like a ton of like montage with music. That's part of why like the film goes along at like such a clip. There's like
so it's clear when you're watching this that this is a
it's like a highly accomplished like work of Hollywood filmmaking.
Exactly. Which is maybe a little off-putting if you're expecting to go into a film that's going to be this heavy, hard look at the Holocaust.
Right.
It begins with like Liam Neeson, like, working the room and like popping champagne. It's kind of odd.
Yeah. Although to be fair, like it begins with a Shabbat service. So the movie begins in color with the Shabbat service and focuses in on the candles, and the color gets sort of drained away from these candles and their flames, and so there are only a few instances of color in the movie. The longest sequence is obviously the end that I mentioned with the modern day, Schindler Juden coming to pay their respects to the grave, but the only aspects of color are the candle flames at the two Shabbat services that we see in the movie at the beginning and end, and then this famous like this image that I already knew about before I'd even seen the movie is just like the little girl in the red coat.
Yeah. Right.
So, but mostly it's black and white, and that may have a documentary feel, or that may have been intended to have a documentary feel. But I don't know if that. I don't know how much it succeeds in making it have a documentary feel versus like making it have a classic Hollywood feel.
Because then it's like very sumptuously lit and
that's the thing.
Very clean cinematography, and so there is like
or like noirish things going on.
Totally. So yeah, it gives it. I think it probably straddles all of these things where it's feeling a little documentary and then a little Hollywood and then a little like. We kind of get back to what we started this episode with, which is on the one hand, this helps everything go down and it makes it a lot more accessible, a lot more watchable. But on the other hand, it raises this question of, is this appropriate? And I don't know. I think I don't personally have an issue with it, but easy for me to say, I'm not, as far as I know, very directly touched by the Holocaust. Although I had relatives who were involved certainly in World War II. But I think that my knee-jerk reaction, or my reaction now, is probably colored by the fact that this movie, I don't think, would ever get made in the way that it was made today. I just don't think you would ever, and I know that this is like kind of a refrain on this podcast, but this is an interesting film because this is 1993. This is actors who are very, very familiar to us, and a director who's very familiar to us. Yeah. It's not that long ago.
No.
But this, I think, is like...
Well, it's 30 years ago. Isn't that crazy? 30 years, man.
Yeah. Hey.
Anyway, sorry, go on.
I think you put this in front of a group of college students today, there would be like some real problems.
Yeah, maybe.
About, okay, I think that the biggest
centering German character.
Exactly. I think the biggest problem would be getting over this hang up of we're seeing things from this German's perspective, and then we're being made to sympathize with him.
Right.
And then care about his conversion and like forgive him, Like this is a level of humanity that I don't think we're capable of, at least publicly. And the fact that this movie from what I can tell, isn't sort of shoehorning in any kind of like political narrative or agenda, as far as I can tell. There's no sort of like scene about undocumented immigrants or something, or like a scene about, you know, fascist like Trump or something. sorry, but you know what I mean. Like if this was made today, like people wouldn't be there wouldn't be the artistic restraint not to sort of like get into the weeds of like connecting this somehow to any number of like particular platform issues.
I can't like agree or disagree with, because I just never watch these kinds of movies when they come out now. Like I haven't seen 12 Years a Slave, for instance. It may well be the case that 12 Years a Slave like demonstrates some of the same good qualities that we're talking about here. So I don't want to just like assume, you know, but I understand the general tendency.
I'm thinking of an experience that I had in art school when to a group of grad students, we showed, I was a TA for this class. We showed this amazing documentary called The Act of Killing. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I've always wanted to see it.
It's an incredible documentary, and I forget where it takes place. I think it's
Indonesia.
And there's a it's basically documenting the kind of reality of these kill squads that committed this just like atrocious genocide. But it's kind of told from their perspective, because this documentary filmmaker goes in and he works with these guys where basically they kind of get excited about the idea of being in a movie about what they've done like 20 years earlier or whatever. It's really remarkable.
Yeah.
And so they reenact a lot of these atrocities.
Yeah.
And they do it up kind of like they're doing like a Hollywood movie. And it's horrifying, but then seeing the effect that it has on these guys as they're reliving what they did 10, 15, 20 years ago as young men. I don't want to say anything more because I want people to experience the documentary, but it's remarkable the effect that it ends up having on some of them in terms of having to take a closer look at what they did and deal with that. And maybe open up some things that they have been burying. And so because the documentary succeeded at kind of humanizing these perpetrators of gross injustice, there was a flat out revolt among the students, grad students. And I know I keep repeating that, but like these are like older people who you would expect to be able to look at something with a certain degree of, you know, openness and maturity. And they're in the theater school too. So you would think that this topic of reenactment, and its sort of efficacy at unlocking things in the human psyche would be really relevant to them. But there was like a flat out rejection of any, like, one of the things that was said was, I don't even see why a film like this should ever be made. Why should I ever see something from the perspective of these people? And it was like, whoa, to think that like you are really so different from this kind of evil,
right?
That you have nothing in common, basically,
right?
You know, that there can be no advantage to sort of to thinking at things from their perspective. And this is interesting because this is something that Schindler explicitly says in the film. He's talking to his accountant, I think, about
Hermann Goeth.
Yeah, about Ralph Fiennes' character. And he's saying, you know, you need to look at things from his perspective. He's under a lot of pressure. If it weren't war, he would be all right. Now, there's a little bit
I find it kind of like a ridiculous statement.
But there's some truth to it, right? Is that like war does bring out the worst in people, right? And
that's what he says. He says and he's got the war, which brings out the worst in people. Never the good, always the bad. Always the bad.
Yeah.
Which I think is ironic because the war actually brings out the best in Schindler.
Well,
ultimately.
but I think that he's talking about himself. I think that there's some introspection going on in this scene because this, you said that I don't know that there's any one moment of his conversion.
Okay.
And I would point to this scene as being
Really?
it. Yeah, because he comes in there. I think it's this scene. He comes in there being very antagonistic, very combative about like, what am I supposed to do? There's nothing I can do about it.
Right.
He's a murderer. He's a psycho. He's really not that bad, but
Right.
war just brings out the worst in people.
Right.
And I think that he can hear himself. He's working something out because by the end of that, he says, he gives him the names of the two elderly people that he wants him to specifically go save. And he takes off his own watch and gives it to him to be used as a bribe.
Right.
So it's like, and then from that point forward, his orientation changes, you know? But this theme of like, you have to look at things from his perspective. This is what makes Schindler so effective as a con man. And I keep using this word, and what I mean is a confidence man. He exudes confidence. And so he's able to sell people on whatever. And so he knows he knows what they want to hear.
Yeah.
When he sells Eamon, Ray Fiennes' character, on the idea of forgiveness, how does he do it?
They fear us because we have the power to kill arbitrarily. A man commits a crime, he should know better. We have him killed and we feel pretty good about it. Or we kill him ourselves and we feel even better. That's not power, though. That's justice. It's different than power. Power is when we have every justification to kill. And we don't.
You think that's power?
That's what the Emperor said. A man stole something, he's brought in before the Emperor, he throws himself down on the ground, he begs for mercy. He knows he's going to die. And the Emperor pardons him. This worthless man, he lets him go.
I think you are drunk.
That's power, Ammon. That is power. Ammon, the good.
I pardon you.
He sells it to him as the powerful thing to do.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So he knows this guy well enough that he can very confidently sell him.
Yeah. Of course, it doesn't last very long.
Well, okay,
but-
because it's not as simple as that.
Yeah.
But it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. That's an incredible scene.
Right.
Because when he looks at him and says, "No, that is power."
Right.
There's like, on the one hand, yeah, he is trying to sell him on something.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, he's not lying.
Right.
You know, and I thought about God's mercy as being the thing that is like most
Yeah.
clearly an expression of his omnipotence.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so
Yes.
what you see is Eamon basically in his own kind of perverted way. And it's actually kind of humorous in a
Right.
you know, kind of devastating way. Wrestling with this.
Right.
He kind of tries to go for it.
Because he tells him, like, this is what the emperors would do.
Right.
And so the way that Aemon does it is he lifts up his two fingers almost like Christ or something. He's like, I
Right.
pardon you. And he
yeah.
even does it to himself in the mirror at one point.
Right.
Like, it's just a very strange.
Yeah, but you can see that it's not easy.
Right.
You know, and in fact, it's almost as though it proves
It's like very uncomfortable for him.
right.
Yeah.
And it almost proves
His weakness.
his weakness in
Yeah.
Schindler's point.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally.
But yeah, so I know that I've kind of been like on a bit of a monologue here, but these questions of you know, from whose perspective,
Yeah.
I kind of find them to be just kind of repugnant because it treats treats the suppressed premise seems to be that we don't have anything in common, or that your perspective is threatening. And
Right.
I mean, it is kind of threatening. It's threatening to your sense of like righteousness,
Right.
because you might find that you actually have more in common with this monster than you would like to admit. You might even find that you sympathize,
Yeah.
which is a scary proposition.
Yeah. That is interesting too, because like it does touch on like the way that the Holocaust is treated as like, and I'm not doing the like, well, Stalin killed more people and why don't we talk about that thing? Not that like has no legitimacy, but just the fact that it's treated as this like unique in human history
Right.
monstrosity, and it strikes us that way in many ways for good reasons, but also like it's not like it was done by this different like species of people,
Right. The capacity for human cruelty is no different,
Yes.
than it really is at any stage in human history. And looking at a figure like Aemon, it's like this is just a classic
Yeah.
psychopath.
Yes.
You know?
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, and he was not only that, but he was like, even before the war ended, he was like put in a mental institution like by the SS.
wow.
Like they diagnosed him
Wow.
with mental illness.
Yeah. Wow.
And then he was later hung. But you also see it in like Germany's relationship to the Holocaust
Yes.
today. There was this amazing essay in First Things.
We should link to that. That
Yeah.
essay is awesome.
One of my favorite essays I've ever read in First Things, called "The Vanity of Guilt" by a German writer, Andreas Lombard. And not to go too deep into it, but basically it's about this idea that like Germany is like in despair because it thinks that like its crime in the 20th century is like
Cannot
so
be forgiven.
it's so that it's so unique that it's like it puts them in a like world historically different status, and that like they basically Germany like doesn't deserve to exist anymore because of this, and because they don't have like Christ, and like they haven't like the Holocaust, like facing up to the Holocaust didn't result in like a mass conversion of the German people. Unfortunately, like they're responding to it in this like very dysfunctional way
Yeah.
of like national self-hatred.
Right. Right.
So but that is partially, of course, mainly because of like the lack of Christ, but like also because of this, like the reason he calls it the vanity of guilt is it because there is like a vanity in like saying that like you have the power to commit a crime so great that it can't be forgiven,
Mm-hmm.
and that, I mean, that goes back to the point about like forgiveness being like the greatest power of all.
Right. So I think that this is a really remarkable film, not just because not just because it's about this amazing story that ought to be known. It's a good story, but also because it's dealing so deftly with these themes of forgiveness and perspective, and it would be I don't want to say it's too easy, but it would just be the obvious choice to do a film about the Holocaust from the perspective of someone on the suffering from a Jewish Holocaust victim,
right?
And that film has been made, but this is amazing in that it's about the kind of the worst kind of war criminal that we can that a lot of people can think of. Second, if it's not about someone who's actually committing genocide, it's someone profiting on it. Like a war profiteer. We so often sort of equate to be like the worst of the worst. Yeah. So there's really something in here for.
Well, to be fair, he's not making weapons; he's making like pots and pans for the army, which does make a difference in how we perceive him.
Sure. Yeah, and then at the end, when he does start producing weapons, he's deliberately producing bad weapons,
which
things that are
felt
gonna
like
malfunction.
there's no way that's really what it was in real life, but apparently, yeah, in real life, the munitions factory that he ran like never produced like a single like functioning shell, which is so awesome.
That is awesome.
Yeah, the ultimate like con artist, and apparently he was like pretty unremarkable like guy before and after the war. He was kind of like a failure in business. The film's like epilogue titles say that like he was a failure in his marriage, you know?
Yeah, right.
And so it's kind of remarkable just like how that situation could like bring something out of him, you know?
Right.
In a different way from Amen Gut. I don't think the film is like just about Schindler, because I mean, like I was struck by like the focus on like names, just like listing names in this film from the very beginning when like the Jews are coming in to be registered in Krakow, and then like turning that around with like the various ways in which names are listed, ultimately culminating in like, you know, Schindler's List of Jews that instead of going to Auschwitz are going to be going to his new factory in what's now Czechoslovakia. Yeah. And that itself, like it is that's why it is truly like a Holocaust movie and not just like a movie about some like incident that happened during the Holocaust, you know, because of just like the focus on like the like quasi liturgical like intonation and like writing of these names, you know, and then like it does it again with like the documentary segment at the end. But yeah, I think that, I don't know, I don't think, as much as the film is easy to watch, I don't think that it's like not morally challenging.
Right.
One criticism you could level at it, and has been leveled at it, is that like its focus for like Nazi villainy is on this like psychopath, you know, rather than on like more on the like the ordinary Germans.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure. But it's also not maybe necessarily what the film is about, because I think that there is a kind of there's a kind of foil in Amen. Not exactly, but there's a kind of doubling going on between
Totally.
Schindler and Amen. So I think that for the film's purposes, they kind of need to focus it in this way.
Yeah, for sure.
But
yes, that's very true. And then but you do get like moments, like there's a few moments in the film that are especially chilling, of like children like hating Jews, you know?
Yeah.
Like and so like that does make you think about like just the normal society level thing that's going on here,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I mean you can't with one movie, even a movie that's 3 hours and 15 minutes long, you can't make like the definitive Holocaust film.
Right.
But I think that you can aspire to make a great Holocaust pop culture film, basically, you know, and because for better or for worse, these things ought to be addressed in the popular culture. Yeah. You know, it's not like pop culture should just be like completely void of any kind of I
mean, it's like, does every crucifix have to be like the bloodiest possible depiction?
Right.
I mean, like, yeah, like it's totally true. Like we can be like wimps about the Passion, and so like I love those really bloody depictions, but like there's a place for different emphases, even for spiritual purposes, but also just for like easing people into these realities as like best you can. And like, you know, as much as people might like cavil at Schindler's List, in another 100 or 200 years, and it's already kind of happening with young people today, like the Holocaust is going to be forgotten, not forgotten literally, but like in the sense that it's going to become more and more of like this abstract event that you learn about in your history books. So like I think the value of a film like this probably becomes greater over time, even if it isn't like displaying like the full horror and like in the heaviest way. It's plenty horrifying, and it does make it real to you. Yeah. And so I think that this film like ultimately it's going to be like do more of a service to like the remembrance of the horrors of the Holocaust than, you know what I mean?
Yeah, because you know, I think that we take for granted, oh yeah, I grew up with you know, my grandfather was in the war, my great uncle, you know, there's a closeness still, but the more remote that historical event becomes, and the more and more that immediacy is lost, the more you're going to need things like this that are sort of Well, I think that it's clear that that's part of the project for Spielberg. If you look at this film, you look at Saving Private Ryan, it seems that clearly part of his priority is to, like I mentioned at the top of the show, like get some of these people on camera before they die. You know, these are elderly people, and we have this opportunity to tell a story and tell it in a very compelling way, and then also end the film, cap it off with seeing some of these people actually alive together with the actors who portrayed them. Yeah, I mean that has an impact and a utility in keeping this keeping this fresh, you know, keeping it immediate, keeping it alive is something that isn't just lost to the history books, you know. One other thing that I'll mention is several years ago when I was still in LA, I saw this amazing puppet show. I think I might have talked about this on the podcast before, called Camp. And it was about the Holocaust. It was about Auschwitz. And this, I forget, it was this puppetry team. I forget where they were from, but the lead sort of puppeteer, his father or grandfather had died in Auschwitz, and what he did was they made this complete to scale miniature replica of Auschwitz that took up the whole space of the stage. This was a theatrical event. Okay. And then they went through and manipulated all of these tiny little figures representing the Germans and the Jewish prisoners. Wow. And then with a video camera, they would sort of frame these little interactions of terrible things happening, people throwing themselves into the electric fences or being taken into the gas chambers. And we have a scene like that in Schindler where we follow a group of women through the process of being taken to one of these chambers. Now, again, mercifully, it ends up being a legitimate shower. Right. But you know, up until that point, you really think this is it, and it's terrifying. And the effect, you know, made me think a lot about this theatrical puppetry experience that I had. It was probably about an hour long. Of this sort of all these events happening at Auschwitz being shown, being depicted with these little puppets, and it was so heavy and it was so intense, and it had to be puppets because it was like the puppets were the suitable container for that. Like what am I trying to say? Like I could not watch this if it was real people, right? You know, or if it was actual footage, right? You know, that would be really kind of impossible for me to watch. But because it was puppets, yeah, they somehow could contain all of that in a way that enabled me to actually enter into it, and the effect was remarkable. I keep using that word. I should come up with a better word. But it was unlike anything I've seen. Wow. And this film made me think about that because, you know, even though it's not puppetry, it's still this sort of like lighter form. This kind of the medium is something that is a more suitable container for me to really allow myself to go there, you know. And the film was tough to watch at a few points. That scene in the shower was very disturbing. You mentioned the stuff with children, separating families, you know, that like there were times when I teared up, and the whole like liquidation of the ghetto sequence. Oh, that sequence is incredible. It's so long. 15 minutes doesn't sound like long, especially when you're watching a 3-hour film, but the effect when you're watching it, it's like, wow, this is still going on. But yeah, the way that it's intercut and like done in a montage way is like
it's like, again, I hate to say it's like very entertaining at the same time. It's kind of a strange
Well,
effect,
what does
know?
entertaining mean, right? I mean, it's not like I'm having so much fun.
No.
It's that it's keeping me sort of captivated, you know, that I'm sort of captured by this. And
Yeah.
And so it brings me through it, you know, and it keeps me in it, even if maybe otherwise I would want to pull away, or you know, I couldn't handle, you know, like if it was any more intense than it is, right? It sort of carefully toes this line.
Yeah.
It begins early in the morning when the soldiers are sort of just arriving in the ghetto and begin to round everyone up.
Yeah.
And then it ends at night when
Yeah.
the extermination and the hunting is still happening.
Right.
You know, and that's tough. That's tough. How do you render that cinematically
Right.
and not lose people, you know?
Yeah. And you know, to refer to the puppet thing you were just talking about, like there are parts where Schindler is watching from this hilltop, and then it has a little bit of that effect.
Everything is in miniature.
Yeah, everything is in miniature, and you're seeing people being gunned down in the street, or
that was
lined
another
up.
effect of this puppetry performance, is that you really got a sense of the scale,
Right.
You know, when they laid out all these little
Yeah.
figures, you know. Oh man.
Yeah. And that's when that girl in red shows up.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I mean, so Spielberg said that one of the reasons for the movie being in black and white, other than this documentary approach, was, he said, the Holocaust was life without light. For me, the symbol of life is color. That's why a film about the Holocaust has to be in black and white. I watched so many black and white movies that I don't know if like that came across so much to me, as it didn't feel like a lifeless black and white to me. But contrasted with the color of the flames and the red coat, it works. I think if the whole film was black and white, I don't think it would have that effect, if that makes sense. You know, for me, it affected me more as like, this is history than like, or resonating with like, you know, wartime footage that you might see or something like that from the period, than being like a lifeless black and white. But anyway, this girl in red, I don't know how it struck you. For me, like what I came away with was that like, this is a particular thing that like, that sticks in his memory.
Yeah.
In Schindler's memory. And I was surprised when you see her again and she's, you know, on a cart of dead bodies.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't, because when you first see her, she's sort of like almost like this magical fairy creature just wandering through this chaos and not, and escaping unscathed, you know?
Right.
But so Spielberg said that the scene with the girl in red was intended to symbolize how members of the highest levels of the U.S. government knew the Holocaust was occurring and did nothing to stop it.
What?
Which does not come across to me at all. He said it was as obvious as a little girl wearing a red coat walking down the street, and yet nothing was done to bomb the German rail lines. Nothing was being done to slow down the annihilation of European Jewry. So that was my message in letting that scene be in color.
Weird.
Totally like does not come across in any way.
Yeah. I mean, I don't
obviously.
know. Yeah. But I know that the effect for me was, like you were saying, it sort of particularizes this experience.
Right.
And like you were saying, the film shows us how he has this sort of gradual turning around.
Yeah.
And so we can trace these sort of discrete events that begin to work on him.
Right.
And this is one
sure.
of them that's very central. And that, I think, is something that we can relate to, because oftentimes it does take not just in a general sense, like something bad happening, but like a particular thing that hits you, you know?
Yeah.
And then that's like where that's the channel through which grace comes. And connected to that, I think this is a film it's interesting because it talks about this phenomenon of particularity or of preference, right? These are Schindler's Jews. He wanted to save the people that worked at his factory. now, at the end, he talks about how he could have saved more if he had just gotten rid of his car, or he had gotten rid of the pen or whatever, like there's clearly still a sense from him by the end of the film that he didn't do enough. But his priority is for the people that he is connected to.
Right.
And
there's a scene where he's offered other people.
Exactly. There's even a scene in the film where
he's bribing this guy at Auschwitz.
And he says, okay, I'm getting a new shipment in. Well, it's 300 people. We'll turn the train around. You can have him. And he says, no, I want my workers.
Yeah.
And I think that it speaks to a reality of our experience of love, of the virtue of charity, which is that it does exercise a kind of preference. There's a closeness,
right,
in your exercising this virtue, which I think is totally lost on a kind of vain altruism, if you want to call it that is just sort of looking about like maximizing.
The funny thing is that if you were to say like why prefer one group over another because they're all human beings, that actually does like surrender a little bit to like just treating people as numbers.
Exactly.
Because in fact the officer says, the Auschwitz guy says, I have got 300 units coming in.
Yeah.
He calls them units, and he says you can't get too caught up in names or hung up on names or something like that because there's a lot of paperwork. And it's like, well, yeah, but remembering the names and wanting these particular people, it keeps them from being, just the
film is about the names. It begins with the names and it ends with the names, Right. And so I think that that's really part of what's going on in this film too, is that even God has a chosen people.
Right.
Even God has a people that is uniquely his own.
Yeah.
And we're all going to be on a list.
Yeah. And Goethe says to Schindler, like, what are you, Moses? At one point.
Right.
One of the brilliant things, by the way, about the way that it handles his con is that like the German officers also know that he is a confidence man. Not that he's a fraud, again, but that he's a confidence man. I mean, Goethe says, I think you're trying to pull one over on me. I think you're trying to make some kind of profit that I don't know about here.
Right.
And that's the great thing about the con, is that he makes them, if he tricks them, it's in making them think that if he's going to trick them, it's going to be for profit.
Right.
Right. And not for some because he has to act just as contemptuous of the Jews as anybody else,
totally in
public.
Yeah. Yeah, but I kind of want to like still make this point that I'm trying to make with that nowadays I think you hear a lot of people talk about charity or altruism, as having to sort of be like utilitarian or maximum efficiency,
right?
Or like you can't feel too good about like helping people out here when this atrocity is happening over on this side of the globe, and like, what are you doing about that? And it's like, look, this is just not how human dignity works. This is not how like human relationships work. It's not how intercession works. It's not how we help each other. Because what happens with Schindler enters into the plight of the people that he's helping.
Yeah.
Right? He identifies himself with them. That doesn't happen when they're just units.
Right.
When it's just, how many people can my money save? Okay, great. Yeah, let's take that trainload of 300. They don't know who he is. He doesn't know who they are. They haven't like really entered into one another's lives. And when he comes back with the women who he's saved from Auschwitz, he's walking in the midst of them, and so there's like, that is the picture of charity, right? That is what love does.
Right.
It enters into, and identifies with the people that it helps.
Yeah.
So I thought that was another way that the film is, at once impressive, but then also I think kind of flies in the face of what nowadays is like a bit of the sort of like progressive sensibilities about how social justice is supposed to function,
right?
Which is more in like this kind of disconnected, strict, by the numbers kind of way.
Yeah. So we've been talking about how the film is, is less heavy than it could be in some ways, but let me go and take the opposite tack now. This film has a ton of nudity in it.
Oh, right. Ugh.
And first of all, let me just say, like, aside from all the famous Holocaust nudity that's in the film, there's a bunch of nudity because Schindler is portrayed as this womanizer, and Amangurt to some degree as well. And so there's like a sex scene. There's more nudity and like sexual stuff in this film than probably any other film on the Vatican film list.
Right.
Right. And that maybe because it's the most. We should say it's actually the most recent film on the Vatican film list.
Really?
Because it was made in 1995. Yeah.
Oh,
this
yeah,
1993.
yeah.
So.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So. Anyway, setting aside the immoral, sexual nudity and stuff. So there's a couple of big scenes where there's like the Holocaust related nudity, and which is usually justified on those grounds. While it's portraying the Holocaust,
Sure.
It's a different type of,
Sure.
Nudity.
Yeah.
So my question is, does recreating the nudity of like these people being stripped down and like dehumanized and herded into the showers, does that perpetuate like human degradation?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I don't know how else you would portray it.
Yeah.
But like,
I mean, there are ways of doing.
Well,
so
you could have
and-
done the shower scene without actually showing nudity, I think. But maybe not where they're the physical checkup where they're all racing around the.
Well, I mean, I don't know. There are always ways of like masking things or getting the kind of shot that you need. There like that scene when they're running around. There's a lot of really wide shots
Yes.
where you can't make out fine details. I think that's
true.
very appropriate.
No. Yeah.
And then I think that there's ways of in the edit, making sure that you. Are duly respectful of the human body.
Yeah, but do you think it is like a perpetuation of degradation?
I don't know. I mean, because like I don't know. This is such a tough question. It's come up on this podcast several times.
Yeah.
I think everybody's going to have a different opinion about it. It's hard to say. My instinct is, yeah, in general, I'm not going to want to do something like that because it's not just what ends up being shown in the final cut. It's what had to happen on the day.
Right.
Which is that like a whole
Yeah, we talked about that with Andrei Rublev.
A whole bunch of people are standing around, film crew, actors, extras, and
you can't exactly do a closed set in this particular circumstance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you've got like hundreds of people or, dozens of people like running around naked. And you have to do many, many takes. And it's like a whole, shot over the course of however many hours.
Right.
And I don't know. It's certainly not a simple answer,
Yeah.
I think anybody who thinks that could just be answered very like simply is probably being
because
a little
it's the Holocaust and therefore it's like
I think it's a little disingenuous. Yeah.
And I'm not talking about like being an occasion of sin necessarily. I'm just talking about like the degradation aspect of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Apparently some of the women and actresses in that shower scene just like had breakdowns like during that.
Yeah.
As you might imagine.
Yeah, well, because there really is you have to then talk about the distinction between portraying something and doing something. And sometimes that distinction gets very blurry.
Right.
This is one of the reasons why sex scenes are not good.
Right.
Because like at that point there's really no distinction,
right.
But yeah, like with something like this, like, okay, you're representing something, but then on the other hand, you are also actually doing something.
Yes.
You're stripping people and making them to run around,
Right.
And it's, look, I'm not saying that I definitely at this point fall on any one side of the question, but I do think that it's something that is tricky.
I mean, you could arguably ask this question about like the act of killing too, even as like a reenactment. Like, what are going to be the fruits of like having these people who are excited to reenact it? You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one thing there is that like that you're not actually reenacting. Like, it's not an actual killing that's happening.
No, that's right.
But here there is an actual
course.
stripping that's happening, right?
Of course.
And then
but I'm just saying, like, even in the case of something that's not literal, you
Right.
could even ask that question.
Sure.
So a fortiori, like,
Yeah, it was one of the only ways that this, if I remember correctly, that this filmmaker was allowed into the country and like allowed to do the film. Like it was like on this condition.
Yeah.
So I think the value the judgment call he had to make was, am I going to be allowed to make this film or not? And if I am going to be allowed to make it, I kind of have to like go with the terms that are being given me.
Yeah.
But then a different kind of film ended up coming out of it.
Right.
But maybe we'll watch it at some point. I do think that at some point on this podcast, we should do like a series of episodes devoted to documentaries.
Totally.
And like
Totally, man.
looking at the documentary form as something that's,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So should we talk about like the climax, like Schindler's like ending here, like the famous, like, I could have done more,
Yeah. I think if that's the last thing to talk about, then that's like a fitting thing. Maybe real quickly we can just touch on a couple other things, like the performances here are really amazing.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think that, Liam Neeson obviously is amazing in this role, and it's the kind of role that strikes one. It strikes you as being like made for him. Every once in a while, you see an actor in a role, and you're like, oh, dude, nobody else could have done this. And I really feel like Liam Neeson, like, this was his role. He's had an accomplished career. He's done a lot of amazing things. But like, if I had to pick one thing from his body of work, and this happened like earlier in his career, he wasn't the big name then that he is now.
Right.
This is it. Like, he's got that panache and that charisma and that sort of,
even just like his being physically imposing.
Exactly. But then he also has this, there's like this poetic depth to him, and to his gaze, that's apparent even at the beginning of the film, at the beginning when he goes into the nightclub and you get these shots of his eyes. It's like, wow, there's like something else going on here. But then where he ends up, as kind of like in the film, like a father to these to all these people that he's saving, and then also kind of a reformed man to his wife. At the end, he comes back to her. It's something that Liam Neeson is really kind of charismatically, like in his persona, he's like very well suited to pulling this off. And so I thought that this was, because it's also not just that he's playing himself. There's a definite character here that he's playing, and he does it very well.
Yeah.
Ralph Fiennes too. Oh my gosh, man. Ralph Fiennes. This is a young Ralph Fiennes. And it's kind of funny seeing him, because I so much more associate him now.
There's no way this is not why he was like cast as Voldemort.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Well, but it's also a lot of his work is him in this kind of a role.
Oh, really?
Not the psychopath, but the sort of like cold killer.
Interesting.
He plays the villain a lot.
Okay.
And so this that performance is great too.
Apparently, one of the Schindler Juden, I forget who, this woman, was like introduced to him one day, and he was in his like uniform, and she she was like very upset because he like reminded her so much of
Yeah,
the
well, I
real
looked up a picture
avant-garde.
of this guy, and he looks like Ralph
Yeah,
Fiennes.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
so there's a resemblance there.
I did not look up Schindler.
Well, there's actually a
Schindler.
resemblance there too. I mean,
Okay.
Liam Neeson is clearly a lot more handsome,
Right.
but they did Liam Neeson up to look
Right.
like Schindler. So
Yeah.
that's cool. And then
I loved Sir Ben Kingsley's performance in this movie.
that kind of rounds out the triumvirate.
It's
here
very
of-
like, yeah, it's just very. He doesn't like, in a way, like Schindler. Schindler's very restrained in a certain way, in a more outgoing way, like in that he's not showing his real colors a lot of the time. But Itzhak Stern is very like, there's like a real like presence, but it's like a very like constrained presence and a very like focused presence, like in himself. Like he doesn't show a lot of outward emotions.
Well,
but there's something very compelling about his presence as well.
Yeah. Well, and this is something that I would say for all three of them, but it probably in particular for Kingsley, there's like an understated quality to his performance.
Yeah.
And then for all of them, there is this another thing I've mentioned on the podcast several times before, this power of stillness.
Right.
We just talked about The Chosen. That was the last episode we did. And this is one of my critiques of some of the acting on The Chosen is everybody's always doing something, always showing you something, always responding, always signaling that this is something that actors are prone to do.
Yeah.
But the best actors will rest in the stillness.
Yeah.
And like one of the best moments with Ralph Fiennes is, I forget the exact context of the situation, but we get this like long stare from him, this like cold, like nothing going on in the face stare.
Yeah.
And you just know, this guy's bad news.
Yeah.
You know? And that's like, I don't know, that's so not only is that, I think, the mark of a skilled actor, especially a film actor, where like the gaze and the presence can be so charged, like you're talking about with Kingsley, and I would argue with Liam Neeson. I mean, think about Liam Neeson's character, think about Schindler's conversion. Like you said, it's almost as if we can't point to where the conversion happens because it happened so quietly. It happened so subtly. But it's still apparent.
There's a strange, there's like I don't know how to describe his like gaze. There's almost like a blankness to his features. I don't mean like in an empty way, but like a clarity of.
You're
like
talking
his
about Neeson?
Yeah. Like there's like a blankness which can sometimes look like innocence.
Well, it's like a poker face, right?
Yeah.
And it's like he can adjust to the situation.
But he can also like there's also sometimes this sort of like lost little boy look in his eyes as well.
Sure. Well, like he looks at the Jewish woman and the little girl who bring him the birthday cake. He looks at them in one way. And then when he's sitting and drinking with Eamon and then talking to him about the power of forgiveness, he looks at him in another.
Yeah.
Like there's this like he's the con man who's going to hold his cards until he sees his opportunity.
Yeah.
I also just thought that like with a film like this about the Holocaust, it's just all the more important that there be this kind of this careful restraint in the performances, because it would have been so easy for the character of Eamon to become this, unhinged, creepy, sadistic psychopath, which he is, but he's not the caricature of that.
Right.
It would have been so easy for Liam Neeson, for Schindler, to be this like smooth talking, caricature of a and he's not that. And so I think
like a Robert Downey Jr. version of it.
Exactly. Not that Robert Downey Jr. is not an amazing actor, but
Yeah.
So much of what Robert Downey Jr. does as an actor is play his personality.
Right.
But Liam Neeson, he definitely exercises a lot of artistic command in this role.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to say that, but we wanted to talk about this last scene.
Yeah, well, I mean, I
Yeah.
think this is one of the reasons that the film like is genuinely challenging. Like if it's not, I mean, it's not that it's not hard to watch at moments, but like if it's not like unbearable on the level of like let's put it this way, I wasn't haunted by any of like the images in the film after seeing it, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe I should be, but
I get what you mean.
But like I think one thing that you can be haunted by is like where Schindler gets to at the end of the film, which is that like sudden breakdown of like I could have done more. It's kind of like the end of Monsieur Vincent, where Saint Vincent de Paul says like, you know, only now am I realizing like how much less sleep I could have gone on and like done more for God, basically.
Right.
And this is Schindler's not a saint, but like this is the attitude of the saints. And like I think today we're very much like, well, I'm doing the required amount of like minimal amount of like fasting, or like how much. I mean, this is of course in all ages always like the spiritual struggle of like not being complacent and feeling like I've done enough. You know what I mean?
Right.
But like, especially now, I think this is like a great moral challenge. You know, and like I don't know, and also like. What would be the takeaway of just showing a horrifying film about the Holocaust? Like, okay, like maybe you can do, you know, the thing where it's like, yeah, this could be any of us. That's good to like make people aware of like their own potential for evil. Right. But like, what are you going to do? What are you going to challenge people like concretely?
Yeah.
It's like, I could be doing more.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so,
yeah.
So I think that's like one of the reasons this film, like, probably more than like many other films about this topic, like the Holocaust, like deserves a place on the Vatican film list.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because like the cynical read of that today is like, oh, you know, white tears or whatever. Like, I don't need this guy crying about, he gets comforted by the Jewish people who he saved. And it's like, I think that there's a particular sensibility today that would just find that repellent, you know?
Right.
But this challenge,
like this is totally something that I can use in my spiritual life.
Yeah.
This ending to this film, you know?
Yeah.
Because it makes it so real. It's like, okay, one more, like, because look, in the economy of prayer, it's sometimes hard to see like the concrete effects of our actions, but this like really concretizes it, you know, like, oh, I could have spent my money on, instead of on this luxury, I could have spent my money on like giving to the poor or whatever it is, you know, and it helps to be able to see concrete effects of what we're doing. That's good. But yeah, a film like this really brings that home. I will say, I know this is very subjective. I felt like in the execution, it was overdone. I could be wrong. But just that, like, I felt like when he first says that and you can see him like tearing up a little bit, like I felt like that would have been enough, as opposed to like him going on, and he like keeps going on about it and like repeating himself and then like breaking down, like falling on Stern. And that reminded me a bit of the breakdown that De Niro has. Is it De Niro in The Mission or Pacino?
De Niro.
Yeah. Do you remember De Niro's like breakdown in The Mission? I kind of felt like that was like good in theory, but like
there's maybe something a little sentimentalist about the ending.
I felt like like I could have done it but I didn't, I could have done it but I didn't, like I felt like that none of that was necessary. I think it was powerful enough given how like stoic he is to like to just have that little
I think that's a fair criticism. I think that probably when we're talking about this film as being a Hollywood film, as a product of popular culture, as something that's very legible, you know, I think that maybe is part of what Spielberg is going for there, is to have this kind of very cinematic climax to this moral arc, you know. But no, it's a fair criticism. Yeah.
Well, anything else we want to say about this?
No, I mean, I think that I would certainly recommend this, obviously, to anybody, and
sure.
I hope that people listen through to the end here, because I think that's a really good point that you made right there at the end, and I think it's also highlights why this film list and this podcast are useful, you know, because these films and these stories are not like completely removed from our spiritual edification.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. And if you'd like to help us out with this podcast, please do contribute to Catholic Culture. We have 4 different podcasts, and they're all funded by listener donations and users of the CatholicCulture.org website. So if you want to help us out, please go to CatholicCulture.org/donate/audio. Have a happy Easter. This is the last episode before Easter. And so, we'll see you next time. We've only got 2 left for the Vatican film list. So excited to finish this up. See you guys later.
Criteria is a production of CatholicCulture.org. Check out our other podcasts, including Way of the Fathers, an early church history podcast hosted by Mike Aquilina, Catholic Culture Audiobooks, bringing to life classic Catholic works through professional, high-quality audiobook recordings, and the Catholic Culture Podcast, exploring Catholic arts and culture with a variety of notable guests. You'll find all of this at CatholicCulture.org.